For more than 2,000 years, there's been one book that has stood above all others as the ultimate guide to strategy. We're talking about The Art of War, a masterpiece known for its timeless wisdom. But what if the story we all know isn't the whole story? You've probably heard this quote. It's maybe the most famous line from the entire book, and it gets right to the heart of its philosophy. Strategy is all about psychology. But, as we're about to find out, that theme of deception, well, it might just apply to the book itself. Okay, let's really get into this. We're going to peel back the layers on this legendary text. We're going to dig into the mystery behind the man who supposedly wrote it. And you'll see why the truth is probably a lot more complicated than the legend. So, first question, who was Sun Tzu? For centuries, the answer to that seemed pretty simple. But the more historians dug in, the more that straightforward story of a brilliant general started to fall apart, and it kicked off a huge historical debate. Right, so the classic legend, the story passed down through the dynasties, is that Sun Tzu or Sun Wu was a real person, a military genius who served the state of Wu way back around 500 BC. This is the image we all have, a single wise author penning these brilliant strategies. But this is where the detective work really starts. Scholars started finding clues inside the book that just don't fit that 500 BC timeline. For instance, the text talks about the crossbow. That weapon wasn't really common until the Warring States period, which is way later. Same thing with metallic currency and these large armored troops. These things all point to a more advanced, more complex era of warfare than the one Sun Tzu was supposed to have lived in. And you have to understand the physical challenge here. We're not talking about a paperback. Before paper, books in China were written on these thin little strips of bamboo, all tied together. A text this long would have been a scroll of about 1,000 of these slips. Now just imagine trying to piece that back together after centuries, after the leather or silk bindings have all rotted away. It's an absolute nightmare for a historian and makes it almost impossible to say for sure that one person wrote it at one specific time. And here's kind of the final nail in the coffin for the simple story. The whole idea of some guy just sitting down and writing a book on his own, that was really not a thing back then. History and records were kept by official state scribes. So it makes you wonder, was Sun Tzu a real person? Or a combination of different strategists, or maybe just a legendary name they attached to this collection of wisdom to give it more weight? The mystery is still very much alive. But hey, no matter who actually wrote it, what makes The Art of War so powerful, so revolutionary, is its core philosophy. And it's an idea that completely flips our usual understanding of war on its head. This right here, this is the absolute peak of skill according to the book. It's the central idea, and it's so often misunderstood. The ultimate victory, the greatest win, is not the one you get on the battlefield. The highest form of generalship is to defeat your enemy's plan, to break their will to fight, and to win before a single sword is ever drawn. Think of it like a ladder of strategy. Right at the very top, the absolute best way to win is through secret operations and subversion. Using spies, spreading misinformation, turning your enemy's own people against them. Way down the ladder is actually attacking their army. And at the very bottom, presented as the absolute worst, clumsiest option, is attacking a fortified city. That's what you do when everything else has failed. This is a warning that echoes through the entire book. The Art of War is obsessed with being efficient. Long, drawn-out wars are a disaster. They empty the treasury, they wear out your people, they cause total chaos. A victory has to be quick and decisive, not some long slugfest. The whole point is to get what you want with the least possible cost to your own side. So, if the author is a mystery, and the big idea is to avoid fighting, how in the world did this ancient Chinese text become a global sensation? Well, its journey across the centuries and across cultures is almost as strategic as the advice inside it. So it was written during this time of constant warfare in ancient China, but it didn't even reach the West until 1772, thanks to a French translation. But its influence really just exploded in the 20th century. Mao Zedong famously used its principles for his guerrilla tactics, and today, it's required reading not just at military academies like West Point, but in boardrooms and business schools all over the planet. What really makes Sun Tzu's thinking stand out is when you put it up against traditional Western military thought, especially from the Prussian general Clausewitz. See, Clausewitz was shaped by the huge, head-on battles of Napoleon. For him, the goal was to find the enemy's army and crush it in one big, decisive fight. Sun Tzu is the complete opposite. He champions the indirect approach. You don't target the enemy's army, you target the enemy commander's mind. You win with strategy, not just brute force. And you can see its legacy everywhere. Mao's famous guerrilla mantra, when the enemy advances, we retreat, when the enemy retreats, we pursue, that is pure Sun Tzu. These ideas also had a huge influence on Japanese military strategy, and today, it's essential reading for the U.S. Marine Corps. And beyond the military, it's lessons on knowing your competition, finding their weaknesses, and using speed and surprise. That's basically Business Strategy 101. And that brings us to one last really interesting thought. In our world today, conflicts aren't always fought with soldiers and tanks. They're fought with trade policy, with disinformation, with cyber attacks. In this new landscape, Sun Tzu's core idea of winning without actually fighting seems more relevant than ever. It really makes you wonder, maybe the ultimate mastery of the art of war is figuring out how to avoid the war in the first place.